Every myth, every whispered legend begins in the earth's deep womb, not in the gilded halls of Olympus. This is not a coincidence, but a primordial law etched into the very fabric of our souls. Transformation, the arduous but vital process of becoming, demands a plunge. It requires a journey into the shadowed valleys of the unconscious, a place we've been taught to fear, to avoid at all costs. Think of Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth, willingly stepping down into the underworld. Consider Orpheus, his music a fragile light against the suffocating darkness, descending to reclaim his lost love. These aren't mere stories. They are ancient blueprints, etched by our ancestors who understood a truth we've largely forgotten. A truth that the shattering of the old self, the unveiling of the hidden layers, can only occur when we surrender the illusion of perpetual ascension. There is a silent contract between our souls and the universe, a hidden agreement with collapse. We are taught to climb, to reach for the stars, to ascend higher and ever higher. But this relentless upward gaze obscures a deeper reality. The soul's greatest revelations often lie not in the stratospheric heights, but in the fertile darkness of the abyss. Here, through myth, through confronting the shadows we've so carefully buried, we begin to decrypt ourselves. The fall, once perceived as an error, is slowly reframed not as destruction, but as the forgotten opening, the sacred initiation into becoming whole. The journey into the dark is not an anomaly, it is the fundamental pattern of existence. Every life, every meaningful transformation is marked by a descent. This is the great secret whispered by the oldest stories. We are conditioned to believe that progress means moving upward, striving for the light, and avoiding the shadows at all costs. But the deeper truths of the psyche reveal something far more profound. A hidden law of inner entropy, an inherent movement towards fragmentation and dissolution that precedes genuine rebirth. The myths of old, from the Sumerian queen Inanna to the Greek hero Orpheus, all underscore this vital principle. They depict protagonists who willingly or unwillingly venture into the underworld, into the deepest recesses of reality. This is not a detour, it is the entire point. Where we seek to build upwards, to perpetually ascend, the soul understands that true growth comes from embracing the inevitable fall, from entering the tomb and confronting the darkness within. And so we begin with this core understanding: the descent is not a rare event, but the very engine of change. It is the cosmic rhythm, the pulse that beats beneath the surface of our striving. But where does this inescapable pattern originate, and how does it shape our very being? This understanding leads us to the first great archetype of the deep dive. And real quick, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos just like this. Now let's keep going. The descent is the pattern, not the exception. It is the deep, underlying rhythm of all life, all growth, all true coming into being. We are taught to ascend, to reach for the sun, to climb ever higher, believing that this upward trajectory is the sole path to progress and enlightenment. This is a profound misunderstanding of the soul's mechanics. Ancient myths, the distilled wisdom of our ancestors, consistently depict the hero or goddess undergoing a mandatory journey into the underworld. These are not mere cautionary tales or exotic adventures. They are vital maps of the psyche, revealing that transformation always begins in the darkness. Inanna, the queen of heaven, willingly steps down into the underworld, shedding her garments and her authority at each gate. Orpheus, armed with his lyre, ventures into the realm of Hades to reclaim his beloved Eurydice. These acts of descent are not deviations from the norm, they are the norm itself. They illustrate a cosmic truth: that to truly rise, one must first fall. The soul requires a confrontation with its own shadow, its deepest fears, and its forgotten aspects. This descent is not a failure or an aberration, but the necessary prelude to any genuine rebirth or individuation. It is the essential first step in a profound inner alchemy. We have created a narrative of perpetual ascension, a dogma that pushes us ever outward and upward, away from the fertile darkness where our true selves lie waiting. This relentless climb blinds us to the necessary work of the underworld, and so we must ask, what does this insistence on ascent truly cost us? The answer lies in the story of a goddess who embraced the depths. Inanna's descent into the underworld was not a whimsical detour. It was a meticulously scripted blueprint for psychological transformation. The Sumerian queen, ruler of heaven and earth, the morning and evening star, chose to descend to the realm of her sister, Ereshkigal. This was no casual visit. It was a deliberate act of confrontation. At each of the 7 gates of the underworld, Inanna was stripped of her adornments, her power, her very identity. Her crown, her robes, her necklaces, her bracelets, her girdle, her royal attributes. Each shedding was a necessary unburdening, a peeling away of superficial layers to reveal the raw essence beneath. It was a voluntary surrender of ego, a conscious act of humbling herself before the abyss. This myth is not a story about a goddess facing death. It is a profound metaphor for the soul's journey into its own unconscious depths. It teaches us that to access our true power, we must first relinquish the illusions of our worldly status and egoic defenses. The underworld, in this context, is not merely a place of punishment or finality, but a fertile ground for radical self-examination and reintegration. Inanna's choice to descend, to face the void and the cold judgment of her sister, reveals a fundamental principle, that the greatest growth often comes from confronting what we fear most. But what if this principle of descent has been overshadowed by a powerful, seductive lie? A lie that promises a different kind of journey, one that avoids the necessary darkness altogether. We have been fed a seductive narrative, a cultural gospel that preaches perpetual ascent. This is the lie of eternal ascent, an ideology that suggests progress, enlightenment, and success are solely achieved by climbing upwards, striving for greater heights, accumulating more, reaching further into the celestial realms. It's a story that permeates our education, our careers, our spiritual aspirations, and our very sense of self-worth. This philosophy champions ascension as the ultimate goal, encouraging us to constantly leave behind the lower aspects of ourselves and our experiences. We are taught to ascend above our problems, ascend beyond our limitations, and ascend towards an idealized, often unattainable state of being. The emphasis is always on forward momentum, on breaking through, on reaching the summit, with little regard for what might be left behind in the descent or what lies buried beneath the foundations we build. But this relentless upward gaze breeds a profound imbalance. It creates a fractured psyche, one that is terrified of the inevitable falls and recoils from the shadows that even the brightest light casts. This lie of eternal ascent neglects the foundational truth embedded in the oldest myths, that true growth and understanding require a movement in the opposite direction, a willingness to go down, to explore the depths, and to integrate the darkness. We are conditioned to believe that the only way to truly grow is to keep climbing, to avoid any downward movement. But this incomplete journey leaves vast territories of the self unexplored and unhealed. What happens to the parts of us we leave behind as we strive for the heavens? And what does this neglected landscape, this inner underworld, truly represent? Hell, in the context of psychological and spiritual transformation, is not a final destination of eternal damnation. Instead, it functions as a profound threshold, a crucial gateway. It is the necessary antechamber to rebirth, the dark womb from which new consciousness can emerge. When we understand its true nature, we cease to fear its depths and begin to see its potential for initiation. The ancient descent myths, from Inanna's journey to the underworld to Christ's harrowing of hell, depict a movement through a symbolic death and into a new form of life. This is not about punishment, but about penetration. It's about going deep enough into the unconscious, into the shadow material, into the core of our own existential crises, to confront the raw truths that lie there. Viewing hell purely as a place of torment is to misunderstand its archetypal significance. It is the place where the old self must be annihilated, where attachments to egoic structures are dissolved, and where the foundational work of transformation can begin. It is a space of dissolution, yes, but a dissolution that is essential for subsequent reintegration. Without this passage through the symbolic night, the dawn of true understanding remains forever out of reach. We often recoil from this idea, preferring a more palatable, less confrontational path to spiritual growth. But this avoidance leads to an incomplete and ultimately unsustainable form of spiritual seeking. What is the consequence of denying this vital threshold, of refusing to acknowledge the transformative power of the inner abyss? The answer lies in a dangerous imbalance. The pursuit of spiritual enlightenment without a corresponding descent into the unconscious creates a dangerous schism within the psyche. It is the fractured experience of a person who seeks only outward light, neglecting the essential darkness that gives light its meaning and depth. This is what happens when ascension is pursued without the grounding and integration that only descent can provide. Imagine a tree that only grows branches upwards, never developing strong roots. It may appear impressive for a time, but it is inherently unstable, vulnerable to the slightest storm. Similarly, a spirituality that emphasizes only transcendence, transcending the body, transcending the emotions, transcending the material world, leaves the individual hollow and disconnected. This form of spiritual bypassing leads to a superficial understanding of oneself and reality. It creates an illusion of progress while leaving the core wounds unaddressed. The repressed shadow aspects, the unacknowledged traumas, the denied emotional pain, these do not disappear simply because we focus on higher vibrations. They fester in the darkness, creating inattention and ultimately sabotaging any genuine spiritual development. The psyche demands wholeness, a balance between opposing forces. To ascend without descending is to amputate half of our being, leaving us incomplete and susceptible to collapse. This disconnect has a price, a fundamental flaw that mirrors the tragic fate of a famous musician who ventured into the underworld for love. Orpheus, the legendary musician whose music could charm gods and beasts, famously descended into the underworld to retrieve his beloved Eurydice. His journey was marked by extraordinary artistry and courage, but his ultimate failure stemmed from a single fatal act. He looked back. This moment, so often interpreted as a failure of trust or willpower, carries a deeper, more potent lesson about the nature of descent and the forces that govern it. In his ascent, as he led Eurydice out of the realm of the dead, a condition was placed upon him. He was forbidden to look back at her until they had both reached the upper world. In his final moments of doubt, perhaps sensing her absence or overcome by a desperate need for confirmation, Orpheus turned, and Eurydice was lost to him forever, drawn back into the shadows. This act of looking back is a potent symbol for the premature return to the conscious, normal world before the integration from the unconscious journey is complete. It represents the ego's inability to fully trust the process, its need for tangible proof, and its fear of the unknown. The unconscious, represented by Eurydice, can only be truly reclaimed and integrated if the descent is completed without the immediate need for validation or egoic interference. Orpheus's tragic mistake highlights the delicate balance required during any deep inner journey. It suggests that some truths are only revealed when we commit to completing the full cycle, trusting the unseen path until its natural conclusion. But who guards the entrance to this unseen path, and what are the prerequisites for passing through? The shadow, that often feared and rejected aspect of ourselves, serves as the very first, most crucial gatekeeper of the descent. It is not an external enemy to be vanquished, but an integral part of our psyche, holding vital information and energy necessary for transformation. To ignore or repress the shadow is to remain locked outside the gates of our own inner kingdom. This shadowy self, encompassing our unacknowledged desires, our suppressed emotions, our perceived flaws, and our hidden resentments acts as a protective shield around our deeper unconscious. It is the rough, unpolished exterior that deters superficial exploration. Before one can journey into the more profound layers of the psyche, one must first engage with this confronting, often uncomfortable, presence. The shadow stands at the threshold, challenging our perceptions of who we believe ourselves to be. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we're ashamed of, the parts we've actively tried to hide from ourselves and others. This confrontation is not about dwelling in negativity, but about acknowledging and integrating these aspects, recognizing their hidden power and potential. Our aversion to engaging with our shadow is a primary reason why many avoid the descent. We prefer to project these unwanted qualities onto others, maintaining a pristine, albeit false, self-image. But this denial only strengthens the shadow's grip and increases its eventual power. What lies beyond this formidable gatekeeper, and how can we navigate its complex defenses? Labyrinths are not merely ancient architectural marvels or quaint garden designs. They are profound psychological blueprints locked deep within our own being. The intricate, winding paths of a labyrinth mirror the complex, often convoluted, journey through the unconscious mind. To enter a labyrinth, physical or metaphorical, is to step into a representation of our own inner landscape. The walker of the labyrinth is not on a quest for a central prize or the slaying of a monster in the traditional sense. Instead, the journey itself is the purpose. It requires patience, surrender, and a willingness to follow the path wherever it leads, even when it seems to double back or lead away from the perceived center. This mirrors the often nonlinear nature of psychological exploration. When we engage with a labyrinth, we are, in essence, navigating the twists and turns of our own psyche. The dead ends represent our inhibitions and repressions. The moments of confusion signify our resistance to confronting certain truths, and the eventual arrival at the center is a point of integration, a moment of profound self-recognition. It is a physical manifestation of an inner process that can feel disorienting but ultimately leads to clarity. These ancient structures serve as tangible reminders that the path to self-discovery is rarely a straight line. It involves detours, challenges, and moments of feeling lost, all of which are essential components of true inner work. But what is the relationship between this winding path and the very fabric of our existence, the dimension that seems to govern our perception of everything? The descent is inextricably linked to the trick of time, a concept that governs our experience of reality and the unfolding of consciousness. Our linear perception of time, moving relentlessly from past to present to future, often dictates our understanding of transformation. We believe we must move forward, always achieving, always progressing, lest we fall behind or become trapped in the past. However, the descent into the unconscious reveals a different temporal dimension. Within the depths of the psyche, time behaves not as a linear arrow, but as a spiral or a fractal. Past, present, and future can coexist, intertwine, and inform one another in ways that defy our everyday logic. Moments of profound realization can feel timeless, and ancient memories can resurface with potent immediacy. This nonlinear experience of time is crucial for true psychological integration. It allows us to revisit past traumas, not to relive them in suffering, but to understand them from a new perspective, to extract their lessons, and to release their hold. It enables us to perceive future possibilities not as predetermined outcomes, but as potentials that are being shaped by our present unconscious dynamics. By confronting the temporal distortions within the descent, we begin to loosen the rigid grip of chronological progression on our lives. We learn that true evolution doesn't always mean moving forward in a straight line, but often involves circling back, revisiting, and integrating what has been forgotten or suppressed. And perhaps the most profound aspect of this temporal dance is its connection to those who carry deep wounds. The figure of the wounded healer, an archetype deeply embedded in human myth and psychology, can only truly function, can only truly heal by embracing the descent. This archetype embodies the understanding that profound healing comes not from a place of flawless strength, but from having navigated one's own suffering and emerged with compassion and wisdom. Think of Chiron, the centaur in Greek mythology, immortal yet mortally wounded. He possessed incredible knowledge of medicine and the arts, but his own suffering gave him a unique empathy and insight into the pain of others. He could not heal himself, but he could guide countless others through their own wounds, often by descending with them into the very depths of their pain. This implies that the act of healing, both for oneself and for others, requires a willingness to venture into the dark, into the uncomfortable, into the very places that inflict wounds. A healer who has not themselves experienced significant descent, who has not grappled with their own shadow or faced their inner wounds, will lack the profound understanding and authentic compassion necessary for deep, transformative healing. The superficial healer, one who offers platitudes and quick fixes without acknowledging the underlying suffering, fails to address the root cause. True healing is a process that often necessitates a journey into the very heart of the wound, a descent into the darkness where the healing can finally begin. And where is this true healing often found? What realm does this wounded archetype understand so intimately? The anima, that inner feminine principle within the male psyche, and its counterpart the animus in the female psyche, eternally reside in the lower, more unconscious reaches of the inner world. This is not a statement of inferiority, but a recognition of where these primal energies are most potent and accessible for integration. The anima's realm, the domain of instinct, emotion, and intuition, is always below, waiting to be discovered. For men, the integration of the anima is crucial for wholeness. It is the source of creativity, emotional depth, and connection to the vital energies of life that often become suppressed in a culture that prioritizes logic and assertiveness. Discovering and integrating the anima often involves confronting the devalued aspects of the feminine within oneself and within society, a process that requires a descent into the unconscious. Similarly, for women, the animus, representing the logos, rationality, and assertiveness, is often found in the deeper layers of the psyche. An overly dominant masculine principle in conscious life can lead to a repression of these vital aspects. Accessing and integrating the animus requires delving into the unconscious, confronting and assimilating these energies. The anima's realm is the underworld of the psyche, the dark, fertile ground where the seeds of creativity and deeper connection are sown. To deny this realm, to refuse the descent into its mysteries, is to remain fundamentally incomplete, severed from a vital source of psychic energy and wisdom. And this journey into the depths often leads us to celestial bodies that offer a mirroring perspective. Saturn's rings, those majestic celestial bands, are far more than an astronomical spectacle. They are profound mirrors reflecting the principles of descent and the structures of psychological limitation and eventual mastery. Saturn, often associated with discipline, responsibility, and the passage of time, represents the boundaries and the trials we must face in our journey toward maturity and individuation. The rings themselves symbolize the cyclical nature of experience, the layers of reality that we must traverse. To achieve a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe, we must begin by acknowledging the constraints and lessons that Saturn represents. This involves confronting our fears, our limitations, and the often harsh realities of existence. This confrontation is a form of descent, peeling back the layers of illusion to reveal the underlying structure. The journey through Saturn's influence, through the rings, is a process of facing what we have avoided. It demands accountability, a willingness to integrate the shadow aspects, and the discipline to work through our deepest challenges. This is a descent into the often uncomfortable truths of our existence, leading to a profound internal restructuring. Just as the rings encircle the planet, Our own inner disciplines and confronting experiences form a protective, yet also constricting layer around our core being. Understanding these rings as mirrors of descent means recognizing that true liberation and growth come not from escaping these boundaries, but from consciously navigating them, integrating their lessons, and thereby transforming their constricting power. But what if we try to escape these necessary boundaries altogether? Spiritual bypass is the insidious act of using spiritual beliefs or practices to avoid dealing with our unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or difficult life circumstances. It is a denial of descent, a refusal to engage with the necessary darkness of the human experience in favor of a shallow, often toxic, positivity or transcendence. It is the spiritual equivalent of a facade. Instead of acknowledging pain, fear, or anger, the spiritual bypasser might resort to platitudes like "everything happens for a reason," "just be positive," or "it's all an illusion anyway." While these phrases can sometimes offer comfort, when used to sidestep genuine emotional processing, they become tools of repression. They prevent us from descending into the depths of our own experience, where true healing and integration lie. This avoidance creates a fractured self, one that appears enlightened on the surface, but is deeply unstable and unhealed underneath. It is a form of self-deception that prevents authentic growth. The spiritual journey becomes a flight from reality rather than an engagement with it, and the necessary work of integrating the shadow and confronting our deepest fears is left undone. The spiritual life, stripped of its necessary descent, becomes hollow and ultimately ineffective. It may offer temporary comfort, but it fails to provide the profound transformation that comes from facing the entirety of our being, both light and shadow. This denial of the underworld has significant consequences, particularly when we consider some of the most sought-after symbols of spiritual attainment. The Holy Grail, that most elusive and potent symbol of spiritual fulfillment, was not hidden away in some celestial mountaintop, bathed in divine light. Instead, it was famously found in the depths, in the wounded land, in the dark places that required descent and healing. The legend of the Fisher King and his blighted kingdom underscores this essential truth. The Grail's attainment is intrinsically linked to confronting and mending the brokenness that lies below. The Fisher King's wound, which mirrors the infertility and decay of his land, symbolizes the soul's suffering when it is disconnected from its vital life force, often due to a lack of integration of its unconscious aspects. The parched land and the suffering of its people are direct reflections of the king's own inner desolation. To heal the land and find the Grail, one must embark on a journey of descent, not just into the physical world, but into the symbolic underworld of suffering and brokenness. The quest for the Grail, therefore, is not about reaching for something higher, but about plumbing the depths, asking the right questions, and extending compassion to the wounded. It requires a willingness to enter the darkness, to face the suffering, and to recognize that true spiritual attainment is often found not in overcoming our limitations, but in integrating them. The Grail is revealed not in ascension, but in the humble act of acknowledging and addressing the woundedness. This understanding profoundly shifts our perception of spiritual goals. It suggests that the ultimate prize is not found in fleeing ourselves, but in returning to and healing the parts we have abandoned. And this return to the broken places is precisely the first stage in a profound alchemical process. Descent is not merely a symbolic act. It is the very first foundational stage of the alchemical process known as nigredo, the blackening. This stage is characterized by dissolution, putrefaction, and the breaking down of the old, the corrupt, and the undifferentiated into its primal components. It is a necessary descent into chaos before any new order can emerge. Imagine a dark, fertile soil. This is the nigredo. It is where the familiar structures of the ego and the personality are broken apart, where the illusions are stripped away, and where the raw, untamed energies of the unconscious are exposed. This process can be terrifying, felt as a breakdown or a loss of control, but it is precisely this dissolution that creates the possibility for a higher synthesis. The alchemists understood that the prima materia, the fundamental substance from which all things are made, could only be accessed through this process of blackening. To create something new, something pure, one must first reduce the existing form to its most basic elements. This requires a willingness to go into darkness, to confront the putrefaction, and to stand amidst the ruins of what once was. Without this initial plunge, the subsequent stages of alchemical transformation, the albedo whitening and rubedo reddening, are impossible. The negredo is where the soul confronts its deepest fears and its most repressed aspects. It is a necessary stripping away of ego defenses and societal conditioning, preparing the ground for a more authentic self to emerge. But this profound breaking down is not an end in itself. It is the vital prelude to what follows. Descent is not fundamentally about suffering, it is about initiation. While the process of descending into the unconscious can often be accompanied by experiences that feel painful or challenging, loss, confrontation, dissolution, these are not the primary purpose. Rather, they are the necessary tests and purification rites of an initiation into a deeper reality of the self. The myths and archetypes consistently portray descent as a passage, a journey through a symbolic death that precedes a rebirth or a new level of awareness. Think of the initiatory rites in ancient mystery schools, where candidates would undergo symbolic deaths and descents into darkness before emerging with new knowledge and a transformed consciousness. This was not about enduring pointless agony, but about undergoing a fundamental reorganization of the self that only such a profound confrontation could bring about. When we perceive the descent solely as suffering, we miss its transformative power. We become victims of the process rather than active participants in our own becoming. The true purpose of the descent is to face what must be faced, to integrate what has been rejected, and to emerge with a more complete and authentic understanding of ourselves and our place in the cosmos. It is a shedding of the old skin to reveal the renewed form underneath. This initiation into a deeper truth is not a pleasant outing. It is a profound and often arduous undertaking. It requires courage and a surrendered will. And it is this very act of initiation, this necessary descent, that forms the unseen, yet crucial, half of our lifelong journey. The descent, when truly understood and embraced, forms the unseen, yet utterly vital, half of individuation. We often conceptualize individuation as a process of ascending, of becoming more fully ourselves by realizing our unique potential and integrating our conscious personality. But this upward focus omits the essential counterpoint, the journey into the depths of the unconscious. Individuation, as Jung described it, is not simply about projecting our ideal selves into the world, but about confronting and integrating all aspects of our psyche, including the repressed shadow, the unconscious complexes, and the archetypal patterns that reside below the surface of consciousness. This requires a deep dive into the underworld of the self, a willingness to explore the shadowy domains that we have long avoided. Without this descent, our conscious personality remains incomplete, unbalanced, and built upon a foundation of unacknowledged psychic material. The pursuit of becoming more fully ourselves, while ignoring the vast unconscious terrain within, is like building a beautiful house on a crumbling foundation. It is destined for instability. The descent into the unconscious is where we encounter the raw materials of our being, where we reclaim lost or rejected parts of ourselves, and where we lay the groundwork for true wholeness. It is the essential counterpart to any outward growth or ascent, providing the depth and groundedness necessary for a complete and authentic self. And this necessary plunge into darkness often appears like a collapse, a failure. The fall in the grand narrative of human experience and psychological development is rarely just an error or a failure. Instead, it is a sacrament, a profound, sacred act that initiates us into deeper truths about ourselves and the world. The descent, the perceived collapse, is in fact a fundamental rite of passage, a necessary ritual for genuine transformation. When we experience what feels like a fall, a setback, a loss, a period of confusion or breakdown, our cultural conditioning urges us to see it as a deviation from the ideal path of ascension. We are taught to strive for constant progress and success, making any perceived tumble a source of shame and defeat. But the archetypal patterns reveal a different interpretation. The descent into the underworld, the symbolic death and rebirth, the journey through darkness, these are the crucibles in which true wisdom and strength are forged. The fall is the moment when the old structures break down, when the ego's defenses crumble, allowing for a more profound and authentic self to emerge. It is a sacred dismantling, a necessary prelude to rebuilding on a more solid, integrated foundation. This perceived failure is often the most potent and sacred initiation we will ever undergo. And so, the journey completes its cycle, not with a final answer, but with a recognition of the profound mystery at the heart of our existence, a mystery that invites us not to flee from the darkness, but to embrace it as the sacred ground of our becoming. Now make sure to subscribe for more videos and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll see you in the next one.